Welcome back to another edition of the Musketeer Report podcast. Today is Wednesday, December 10th. Xavier is 7-3 after their Crosstown Shootout win over Cincinnati. They are currently ranked 84th in KenPom and 108th in the net. We're going to break down the Crosstown Shootout win over the Bearcats, and we're also going to talk to Paul Fritschner to get his thoughts on that win and what it looks like for Xavier going forward into Big East play. So I had three main things coming out of the shootout that I want to talk to you guys about before we bring Paul into the show. And the first is Tre Carroll, obviously, the 30-point performance, 13 of 18 from 2-point range, just a special game. And, when I watched it back after seeing it live, I called the NKU game the next day, came back and went through the game on Synergy. It just kept coming back to me that the shootout is always about who steps up and makes big plays, who makes the big shot, who chases down the loose ball, who makes the extra effort play. And time again in the second half of this game, it was the Xavier players who made the big play, and most of those were made by Tre Carroll. And it's so fitting because he was going head-to-head against his former teammate at Florida Atlantic, Baba Miller, and everyone had talked about Baba Miller, including myself, talked about Baba Miller being the best player for either team going into this game. You know what Baba Miller did in the second half? Went like 2 for 7 or something and didn't score a single point in the final 7 minutes of action. That's what the shootout is. It's who's going to step up and make the plays in those moments, even if it's a head-to-head personal battle like Tre Carroll and Baba Miller were having. And Tre Carroll was that guy. And it wasn't just Baba Miller, by the way, that he scored on. Like, he scored on Baba Miller, he scored on Sean Abayev, he scored on Tyler McKinley, he scored on Jalen Celestine. They tried multiple defenders on him. They tried the zone defense. None of it worked. Now, the fact that they did not double team him to force the ball out of his hands, the fact that they said they hadn't worked on a double team yet, even though they had already changed and switched to play a zone defense, was like, how can you not double team out of a zone? Makes absolutely zero sense to me. I don't know why Wes Miller would admit that or say that in public. But either way, hats off to Tre Carroll. I was wondering, where does that stack up in terms of Crosstown Shootout performances by an individual? And I was looking through some of the games. You got the 2021 game where Jack Nunge had 31 points, 15 rebounds. I think the part of that game where I mean, Jack Nunge dominated. He was definitely the story coming out of it. But the part of that game where maybe it didn't feel as dominant from an individual standpoint was Nunge did so much of his work at the line in that game. He was 11 of 15 at the free throw line. And again, we were all talking about him after Xavier won that game, but years removed, I don't think that one necessarily jumps out to me as what a great Crosstown Shootout moment, standout individual performance. Going back a few years before that, you have the 2019 Najee Marshall game where he had 31 points, 8 rebounds, 5 steals. He was 12 of 22 from the field in that one. That's another one where it was like, I mean, it definitely stands out. It's one of those that you remember, and Najee had his night. It was his day there in that Crosstown Shootout. But not the first one that comes to mind. There's 2 Trayvon Blewett games, and the first Trayvon Blewett game in 2017 is the one that really jumps out to me as I think the best individual Xavier effort. Now, it was a losing performance, but he had 9 3-pointers, scored 40 points in an 86-78 loss. That was in late 2017. I think it was in January that year. And then the following year, they played it before the turn of the new year. So that was also in 2017. He had 28 points with 5 threes in that one. Trayvon Blewett, one of the great Crosstown Shootout performers of all time. But his 40-point effort where he hit the 9 threes, that's the one that really rivals this Tre Carroll performance in my mind. Those are the two, if you're going to ask me like individual performances, it's those two, and then it's the 2015 D Davis game where he went 5 of 5 from 3-point range and had 16 points. It was only 16 points, but Xavier only scored 59 in that game too. It was a really low scoring 59-57 win. That just felt like such a heightened win because Mick was at his peak as UC's coach. The UC team was pretty good, I believe. It was a big game. And for D, who had been struggling shooting the ball big time, to go out there and go 5 for 5 and really just kill UC with what they were trying to do, which was they did a good job of shutting down Xavier's offense in that game. I mean, holding them to 59 points, but the one guy that you decide to leave open goes 5 for 5 from 3 and kind of blows that scouting report game plan up. It was all Mick's fault, but D still hit those shots, and it's definitely a memorable game. But it's not as impressive as the Blewett 40-point game with 9 threes. It's not as impressive as the Tre Carroll game here, 30 points, going 13 of 18 from 2-point range. And it wasn't just like dribbling to the basket and laying it in. It wasn't fast breakouts. It wasn't threes in transition. It was him ISOing, going one-on-one, sometimes one-on-two, when he ran into help defense, and making tough finishes, a lot of times from the mid-range too. And that's part of what made this performance so impressive, is it was a heavy lift. It was difficult to go 13 of 18 from 2-point range the way he did, and he still managed to pull it off. So I think it's important, not just because of Tre Carroll gets an incredibly memorable night in the Crosstown Shootout, but I think it's important for the Xavier team because they've definitely had question marks about who is their go-to guy on the offensive end, and do they even have a player capable of a performance like this? Tre Carroll showing up when the lights are the brightest, when it matters the most, that gives you a lot of confidence going forward that, okay, we got our guy. We know late in the game who we can rely on if things aren't going well. We know when we're in a rut, when we haven't scored in 3 minutes, who we can throw the ball to and he can maybe get us out of it. Tre Carroll has that type of potential on the offensive end, and what a brilliant performance by him. The second takeaway for me that I want to talk about was the Richard Pitino versus Wes Miller situation. I mean, the only way that this could have been more embarrassing for Wes is if Richard walked out and pantsed him during the pregame handshake. I mean, seriously, your job is on the line, and you let that happen against your biggest rival, to a guy in his first year at the school with a makeshift roster. It can't happen. And it wasn't like, like Xavier's throwing in miracle shots that they don't hit. It was like Xavier had a good game plan and had some players to put UC in a bind, and UC just couldn't adjust. And then after it was over, Wes had ridiculous excuses for why they weren't able to adjust, which really just went back to he's not a good coach. And on the other side, you look at what Xavier started out with. I mean, it's like the specific game plan of attack. You go after Shanabayev. You go after Kerr Kriisa. They were relentless in the first half, just going after UC's 2 weakest links defensively. They kept challenging them in different ways, and eventually they forced UC into a zone because they couldn't guard Tre Carroll, and because Shanabayev and Kerr Kriisa kept getting beat in one-on-one situations. They also started the game. I mean, the very first play of the game by Xavier was them running a set play to see how Mustafa Sham was going to guard perimeter actions. See how he's going to handle a couple screens on the perimeter leading to a 3 for Jovan Milicevic. They got a wide open 3. It didn't go in, which a lot of their threes didn't go in this game. But I just loved the intentional approach of how they were feeling it out, how they had a plan of attack for UC, and how they were able to adapt as the game continued. It's like, if I'm a Xavier fan right now, I'm not sure what more you could want to see so far out of the staff from a coaching perspective. You go back to late in that game, UC takes the lead, and right away Xavier comes back down, runs a set play, gets a flare screen against the zone, wide open 3 for Filip Borovichinin. He knocks it down in front of the bench. Takes the lead right back. Demoralizing shot if you're the Bearcats. Massive lift if you're the Musketeers and all the fans in attendance. And that was the moment where I really felt like, okay, Xavier just won the game. And again, it's coming from a really nice play that they run against the zone, called from the bench. If you're, again, adaptability, X and O success, not just from a system perspective, but with real game time decisions, in-game situations where you're running good stuff that makes sense against the current team because you've seen a mismatch or you've seen a matchup to take advantage of. The Tre Carroll stuff, going to the ISO stuff the way they did with him, where he could just start from the perimeter, flip his hips around, and kind of back his man down into the mid-range and play from there. That stuff is awesome to watch in real time happen. And to me, that's like the sign of a good coach, a good coaching staff. The ability to motivate, I think that's still really important in the current era when you've got all these guys that are one-year mercenaries, that are coming in just to collect a check, and they're probably going to leave before the next season starts. It's hard to keep everybody motivated. It's hard to keep everyone together. It's hard to keep everyone on the same page and handling adversity well, handling changing roles well. The staff has done a really good job with that. This group seems completely bought in. They seem like they're still improving. They seem like they like playing with one another. Clearly, they were motivated in a big moment, a game that none of them had ever participated in, and yet they were ready for it. For all those reasons, I think if you're a Xavier fan right now, that doesn't mean that Richard Pitino is going to be great at Xavier. I mean, they could have 3 losing seasons in a row for all I know to start out. But if I'm looking for positive signs as a Xavier fan, or negative signs for that matter, but I'm just trying to grade them on what we've seen so far, how could you not be pleased with what you've seen? Would you like the roster to be better next year? Yeah, absolutely. We know there were major reasons why it wasn't that way with last year's transfer portal and their first year being here. You'd like the roster to be better going into next season without question. But in terms of what we're grading off of in this season with the roster that they had, it's hard not to like what you've seen. I'm not sure where you would even ding them or where the negatives would be. It's been a pretty impressive run so far from this coaching staff, at least in my opinion. Then finally, where does this leave Xavier? I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that Cincinnati is in some real trouble, I think. I think that's a team that's going to really struggle in Big 12 play. And the main reason being that they're a team that's built for defense, and 2 of their starting defenders can't really guard. Kirk Risa and Shanabayev. I mean, they are weak links out there that other teams can exploit. And if you watch Xavier do it the way they did, you don't think Big 12 teams are going to scout them and do that exact same thing that are more familiar with them? I mean, that's going to be a real problem for them. Mustafa Sham was ranked extremely high in the transfer portal rankings when UC landed him. He's clearly not that type of player yet with where he's at in his development. So I don't think he's the answer that most people projected him to be coming into the season. And so this UC roster isn't as good as it was supposed to be to begin with. And a couple of their guys that are important pieces in Kirk Risa and Shanabayev, they don't really fit with that defense-first approach that this team is trying to hang its hat on. So UC is going to struggle, and I think you have to legitimately acknowledge that when you say, yeah, big win for Xavier, but I don't know how much it says about what's to come, because I think Richard Pitino even acknowledged this in his radio show. It's like, what did this tell you? It tells me that Tre Carroll scored really well in one game. He tells me he can get 30 points. And while it was a great performance, I don't know that it's super instructive about what's to come. At the same time, I think now you've beaten a West Virginia team and you've beaten a Cincinnati team that are both ranked right around that 75 mark in KenPom. And that's where a lot of teams in the Big East are going to be this year. So it maybe does speak to your ability to consistently play with and even win those types of games, which could be important. I think the change to the small ball approach and the shift in style of play has definitely made Xavier a lot more competitive. There's no question about that. How many wins does it equate to? I don't know yet. We'll talk more about that in a second. But this style of play is real. It's not leaving. We've seen it enough, not just in the MTE event in Charleston where it still felt kind of new and those things can always be kind of weird, but now you've seen it against Cincinnati in the Crosstown Shootout too. And it is really creating mismatches for opponents, and it's really making them hard to guard at times. So I think that was a huge shift and really changed everything around for this team and has given them a real chance. And I think if they're going to take great care of the basketball, that also definitely helps their chances of winning some of these close games that they're going to find themselves in the Big East. There's also the potential that we'll continue to see guys get better. I think Anthony Robinson and Pop Njai, the 2 big men, the backup big men, those are the most notable ones, the most obvious ones that they're kind of waiting on, that they need more from, especially to kind of change this team again and give them a little more defensive toughness around the basket, rebounding ability when they go up against bigger, more physical teams. St. John's, for instance, it feels like that's the type of matchup where they're going to need those guys to give them real minutes. So I think there's still the possibility that those guys, after playing pretty well, especially Pop against Cincinnati, that they could continue to develop and get better and give this team more, which could also be another nice boost. If I was at 11 wins before the season, that's what I said, 11-20 was my official prediction on the preseason preview podcast we did with Paul. After first few losses, updated again and said, if you were asking me now, I think I'd probably be around 7 or 8 wins for this team. Well, if we're doing like the Vegas real-time update where they change the win totals as the season goes on, I think right now you'd have to bump that thing up closer to, 13, 14, 15. I think I'll probably set myself around that 14 range. Maybe call it 14 and a half as the win total number right now that I would set it at. I would change my projection probably to 14 wins total for this team. So we're talking about 6 or 7 conference wins, right? I think that's possible. I think that's doable at this point with what we've seen from this team. That's not a guarantee. Things could turn out as ugly as I originally projected, 20 losses. I think that's still on the table. But man, they'd really have to collapse on these guys. They'd really have to win almost none of these close games in Big East play for that to happen now. And that's pretty exciting if you're a Xavier fan. This season's going to be much more fun to watch than we were originally projecting. There's no doubt about it. And you have to give so much credit to this coaching staff and this team for being able to switch things around so quickly and fight through some early adversity. Let's bring in Paul Fritschner. Let's get his thoughts on the game as well. All right, Paul Fritzner is with us. Paul, I imagine that was a pretty good weekend for you. Thank you for joining the show. I want to start with this. In your time since being at Xavier, what's your top individual shootout performance that you saw?
Oh, I was not at the Trayvon Blewett 40-point game. That's the only open to the public game that I've missed since I was a student back in 2015. I wasn't at the game in COVID, but outside of that, Quincy Oliveri's definitely up there. It'd be probably between one of those two, right, Rick? And it's hard to say that what we saw on Friday night for Tre Carroll in a game like that, when there's so many question marks around Xavier. And, I know Cincinnati was favored a couple of years ago. I don't want to take away from what Quincy did for sure, but to me, and maybe it's some recency bias, but for Tre Carroll to truly put the team on his back the way he did down the stretch in the second half, for them to just clear out space and say, go to work. And he kept challenging Baba Miller, went right up against Mustafa Cham, and he had an answer every single time they called his name. To me, it's hard to look back on a performance better than that one that I have personally attended.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The difficulty level of the way he got to his 30 points made this feel like a bigger performance, I think. Those were some of hard shots. It was a lot of ISO balls, a lot of mid-range jumpers over the top of a 6'11" guy who was guarding him fairly well. And you may say he scored 30 points. How well was he guarding him? But I think on some of those shots late in the game, he was right there with him, had a hand up challenging him, and he just made it over the top of him. Yeah,
and I think Richard Pitino pointed it out on the radio show a couple nights ago. He hits his free throws. You're talking about 35, 36 point game. Just what he did from the floor and how much we had talked all week about what Xavier is going to need to do from 2, right? They were going to need to play inside the perimeter. Of course, they were going to have to hit threes, and they ended up not doing that. But the question was, what could they do around the basket? And to go, whatever they went, 24 for 36 from inside the arc, Rick. And most of that was because of what Tre Carroll did. He truly... he came out and showed what kind of player he can be against a front line like that. And yeah, I thought it was spectacular.
Yeah, it is funny, though. I was going through some of the other games earlier in the show of, the Jack Nungy 31 and 15 game, but it's like 11 of those 31 were scored at the free throw line. And then
that's what I mean. Yeah.
The Najee Marshall game where he had 31 points. It's like, that UC team just wasn't very good. So, it was an amazing performance. It does stand out to me, but for some reason, the first one that popped up in my head that I compared this to was the Trayvon Blewett game where he scored 40 and Xavier lost. So it's funny that you immediately went to that one too. Those really stand out in my mind as well as kind of the, like if I was comparing it to the individual performances that I've seen, I think Trayvon Blewett would be the top one, even though it was a loss. And I would probably put this slightly above it because Xavier won the game in a game where it was difficult for Xavier to win. Like they weren't a heavy favorite going into this game. UC wasn't at any disadvantages going into this one other than that they were playing at the Cintas Center where they can never win. So I think that's kind of interesting where both of our minds went there. You mentioned the 3-point shooting for Xavier or lack thereof in this game. What would you have said if I told you before the game that they were going to go 6 of 28 from 3-point range?
I would have said they probably lose this game by 15. It just the way the game was going to play out, I would have assumed they lost the game. I would have assumed that when you and I were bouncing back and forth on all week on these prediction shows about how this game was going to play out, and my thought was either Xavier was going to win a close game or UC was going to win a blowout. That's what I said on pretty much every show. I didn't think there was any in between. I didn't think UC would win a close game at Cintas because I thought if it was up in the balance, like it was, the home team would win. And I thought UC might have the talent on this team to blow Xavier out. So if you told me that Xavier only hit 6 threes and they shot the percentage that they did, then yeah, I'd probably say things didn't go very well. But Tre Carroll had another narrative to write there.
Yeah, that's, I said before the game too, I think multiple times I said, I don't see a path to Xavier winning if they don't hit threes in this game or hit, double digit threes in this game. But what I didn't factor in was their ability to stretch UC out and play on the perimeter with their big men could still have an impact in this game and allow them to get the 2-pointers that they got. Because that's still what happened. I mean, it was still UC's inability to guard Jovan and Trey on the perimeter that really screwed up their defense more than anything. But it didn't result in a lot of 3-point shots made by Xavier, which was interesting the way that played out, and also speaks to maybe a little bit more balance for this team on the offensive end than maybe we previously thought. Like, okay, if the threes aren't going, but we're getting you closing out on us and scrambling around the perimeter, chasing us a little bit, we maybe do have some more pieces that can get inside and score.
Yeah, and I think, again, it goes back to the coaching staff and what they've done here, trying to make some adjustments over the last few weeks. They changed the starting lineup. It's much more dynamic offensively. And I think I was reading something, I think it was from Chili Donovan's site yesterday. They were looking at the shot chart of what Xavier has done to improve both offensively and defensively. And look, they're not setting any records inside the paint, but they're at least serviceable now to where in these last 4 games, they've won 4 games in a row. This 4-game winning streak, and I know some of it's been bye games, I get that, but you're starting to see at least some progress inside the arc to where, going forward, you're going to have to get that in Big East play if you want to have any kind of success. So at least you're starting to see signs of life.
Did you have a favorite moment from Friday night's game?
I think, there were a couple that stood out. I had a really interesting perspective. It was the first time I'd ever sat that close. I was sitting right next to the bench, and it was an interesting perspective to me, seeing how the whole game operated from that view, right? But also being there. Usually we're sitting upright in the media bunker, you and me, and it's a little bit separated from the court. So seeing it from that angle and, the passion and the emotion from both sides. But Tre Carroll at the end, it was funny watching Richard try to calm him down as if like, hey, don't get it. We're only up 4. Don't get a tech. Like, don't send UC to the free throw line and then they get the ball and something goes wrong here. Like, just wait 15 seconds. But to me, we had spent so much time talking on this show. Do they understand what they're getting themselves into? Does anybody on the court, UC or Xavier, do they understand the rivalry? And at the very end, when Trey's walking around in the back court and he's showing all the emotion that he is, it doesn't matter if you've been at Xavier for a month or if you've been at Xavier for 4 years. One of the first things you're shown as a recruit is what this game means. And it was clear all that emotion poured out. So I thought that was a really cool moment to see the building full, to see Trey embracing the fans, and just to really have like a shot in the arm for this coaching staff to say, all right, here, everything that we've done over the last couple of weeks paid off in those final few seconds.
Yeah, Trey doing the zip them up profusely, like in a parade route around the other end of the court while they were shooting free throws. And then his other teammates starting to join in. And then Richard trying to tell them like, all right, that's enough. Like, knock it off, was a hilarious moment, especially from that vantage point up high where you can see it all play out in front of you. Like, you can see them losing their minds. Richard doesn't know about it first. At first, it seemed like he's like, all right, like, fine, like, let them have their fun. And then after like all of them are doing it and getting over the top about it, he's like, all right, knock it off. What are you clowns doing at that point?
Yeah.
Just very funny. And then to get into the post-game press conference where it is asked, why were you doing the zip 'em up? And they had no idea what it meant, where the origination was from. I quote, I think Tre Carroll said, I saw a guy from last year's team, I think his name was Zach, doing it. Let me just be very clear. If you see Zach Freemantle doing things on social media, the idea should not be just go ahead and copy it blindly. Okay. That's not like great life advice right there. So you got away with it this time, Trey, but in the future, I would like maybe use a little more discretion when viewing Zach Freemantle social media videos. That's all I'll say.
I will say on the court in the run of play, I think Pop Njai's 3 or 4 minutes that he played were maybe my favorite moments because I leaned over to Brian Hicks, who I was sitting next to, when Pop was checking into the game. And I think it was going into like the under 12 or maybe the under 8 in the first half. And it was clear that you were trying to get him into the media timeout and maybe get whoever it was, Jovan or Anthony, whoever was out of the game, get him back, right, to just survive into the media timeout, get Pop a couple minutes, but to have a block, 3 rebounds, an and one, convert the free throw, and do all of that in about 3 minutes and then come right back out. To me, on a stage like that, for a guy like him, that to me was my favorite on-court moment from the game.
Well, and like maybe you could say the and one tip in was a little bit of just like right place, right time. Okay, he maybe got a little bit quote unquote lucky on that specific play, but like the one block he had was a big defensive play in a big moment. Some of those rebounds were like, you're in a crowd and you need that ball. And those were important plays. So I think a lot of fans came out of that being like, hey, maybe we got more than we knew in this Pop Njai guy. Where are you at? Give me on a 1 to 10 scale. How much are you willing to buy into the Pop Njai breakout game hype train here?
4 or 5. I mean, I'm not really buying that this is like some, seminal moment in Pop Njai's career and he's going to turn the corner and play 15 minutes a game now. I think he utilized his minutes as well as he could. And, Richard talked about it on the radio show the other night. There's a vision for Pop and Anthony. And he said, as long as they stick around and trust the process and stay in the program, they don't transfer somewhere else. There's a development plan there. Pop Njai is still just a sophomore. Anthony Robinson's still just a sophomore. They have a ton of room to grow. They're constantly, especially Pop, constantly being, told some fairly basic things of where to go and what to do and how to, improve where they are on the floor at the right place at the right time. So I'm not going to read too much into those minutes, but I think that even more so speaks to how much I enjoyed watching him out there was because I wasn't expecting it. And for him to produce as much as he did in those 3 minutes was fantastic.
No, I think that's well said. I would say like same thing, 2 or 3 for me, but for the same reasoning, just that like, I don't think it's much of a difference maker in terms of what his role is going to be or where he's headed. And we might not see another stretch like that from him again all season, to be quite honest, but one, at least it is in there. We have seen a few things from him and now to where you can buy into the long-term vision for his development. And 2, if nothing else, what a moment in a rivalry game where it seems like it matters so much more. What a moment for him to have. Another guy that I wanted to ask you about, Paul, is it felt like to me there's a world in which that this game could have turned into the Filip Borovichinen game. I mean, he had 12 points. He's 5 of 7 from the field. He made the 2 threes, including that huge one with about 2:30 to play after UC had just taken the lead back. Xavier comes down. They run that little flare screen for him against the zone. He hits the 3 from the right wing, right in front of the bench. He also had 4 assists, 1 turnover. I mean, it feels like this performance is rightfully getting overlooked because of what Tre Carroll did. But to me, that's a really good sign because, I mean, you tack it on to like the Texas A&M Corpus Christi performance where you saw him go for 10 and I think 15 rebounds or 14 rebounds or whatever it was and really buy into that, like being a superstar in his role mentality. I just thought he was so solid against UC and kind of playing that role again without needing to take a lot of shots that bodes well for where Xavier's going because he could be an integral piece.
Yeah, I would agree. I think shot selection for him is really important, that you're not trying to force things and bog down the offense right when it gets to him because he's not the most talented shooter on the team. So you don't want him forcing things. And I think that's what he did early in the season, that he was trying to be the hero in too many spots. And heroes may be too strong, but I've said it a million times. He was just trying to do too much because he's an older veteran and he wanted to play as well as he could to help the team. He's realizing now he does have more support around him and he can play his role and he's doing it effectively. And he did it very well against Cincinnati.
Well, I also think, Paul, that's a great point that you just brought up. Part of what's changed for him is the style of players around him. When you think about a lineup, if you have Anthony Robinson at the center position, instead of this spaced out, more playmaking group that they have now, it's like, well, you're really relying on a floor that's not spaced out. You're relying on a guy like Filip to do a lot more in terms of the playmaking off the bounce. Now, when you have the floor spaced out like this and you're slinging it around and everyone's able to use their passing and cutting ability more, as opposed to being like the floor's tight and we're trying to drive into a crowd right now, I think there's less pressure on him to make something out of nothing, so to speak, and it really fits his game better. I think one of the most exciting parts of this game from a Xavier fan standpoint would have been watching the passing and the cutting, especially when UC went to that zone defense late in the game. Like, they had that one possession where I think they went back-to-back no-look passes. It might have been like All Right or Roddy Anderson threw a no-look pass to Malik Messina Moore, and then he dropped off a no-look pass to Tre Carroll, and then Tre Carroll had the reverse layup late in the game against the zone. It's like those types of plays are really showing you the way that this small ball unit, the death lineup with Jovan at the 5, can put teams in a bind with their ability to see things and make plays with their skill.
Yeah, and they're gonna cause some matchup problems, the rest of the season. I don't know how many games they're gonna win the rest of the season, right? I mean, I think you're starting to see a lot more promise out of these guys than you saw in the first 3 games of the year. But regardless of whether there's 15 wins left on the schedule or whether there's 5 wins left on the schedule, they're gonna produce entertaining moments because of the style that they play and the lineup that they're putting out there and the shooting that they're bringing to the table. Passing, cutting, they're getting the offense down. You can tell some of these older guys, like Malik Messina Moore, he's not scoring it at the level that you're probably hoping. I still believe that that's going to come. Maybe he's not averaging 15 a game, right? Like he was in the first couple of games and the bye games, but his shooting will improve. I mean, I at least I believe so. I think his shooting will improve. And if it does, then you're just adding one more piece to the puzzle.
Yeah, it feels like it's becoming pretty clear we're getting to the point where he doesn't have that aggressive mindset on the offensive end, to where he's not going to develop into a leading scorer for this team, I don't think, based on what we've seen. But I'm with you on the fact that he can clearly shoot. I mean, there's a reason that it's not just us that were saying this. There were people inside the program that thought he was one of their best players going into the season. So he's clearly shown them something on the offensive end. And I do think that he will have at least a few big games where he knocks down some shots and gets it going a little bit. But I would say, like, his aggressiveness, his willingness to kind of be that alpha on the offensive end has been a little bit of a disappointment, and definitely, I mean, that's been a weakness of his or something that he's lacking on the offensive end.
Sure. Yeah. But
so you were bringing up where they were going to finish, and that was actually something I was talking about right before I brought you on. I kind of did, if you're doing like the Vegas win totals for a team, it constantly gets adjusted as they go throughout the season, right? And a lot of times it's only bouncing around like a game or two up or down. And for the Xavier team, it's like I started at 11, and then I think, we were talking after the couple losses in a row to Santa Clara and Iowa, it's dropping down to like maybe they're only going to win 7 games. But now I would definitely bump that up more, a few more games from where I started at with the 11. I'd put them up in like the 14 or 15 range probably. So I wanted to ask you, though, if you look at the conference right now, half of your conference games are going to be teams that are similar to West Virginia and Cincinnati, at least from like a KenPom overall metric standpoint.
Yeah.
We're talking about West Virginia and Cincinnati were like 74th and 78th in KenPom, so very similar there. Creighton is 68th, Providence is 71st, Marquette is 92nd, Georgetown 93rd, DePaul 129th. So all of those teams are either right around that range or worse in terms of their KenPom metrics, which I don't know that Xavier's proven they can do better than that yet, but they've proven they can play with and beat teams ranked right in that range or better based on the West Virginia and Cincinnati performances. So Paul, given that there's going to be 10 games against teams like that, what do you think a reasonable record is in those 10 games?
I think at least 6-4, if not 7-3, could be very attainable. I mean, we're to the point, Rick, where I watch so much Big East basketball night in, night out. I'm watching all these teams play, and I'm kind of to the point with the Big East where, before the season, I wrote off the 6 games against Creighton, St. John's, and UConn, and then what could they do in the other 14? Creighton is certainly beatable. They don't even look like an NCAA tournament team right now. They just got their doors blown off by Nebraska the other day. And Nebraska's a decent team, but they shouldn't have lost by, 20, 25, whatever it was. St. John's, they'll probably improve by the time we're sitting here at the end of January when Xavier plays St. John's for the first time. But right now, St. John's doesn't look like the national championship contender that we thought they were going to potentially be going into the year. I'd say UConn is the only team right now that I look and go, yeah, all right, Xavier's for sure going 0-2 against UConn this year unless something crazy happens because, UConn, if you've watched any UConn, you watched them last night against Florida, they look like a true upper echelon national title contender right there with Arizona, Purdue, Michigan, the top of the cream of the crop. But Rick, who's to say? Now, here's the thing about this Xavier team, Rick, to finish up this point. Xavier could, in my mind, and I don't think this is crazy to say with the way the Big East teams are playing right now, it is not crazy to think that outside of UConn, Xavier could beat any team, but they could also lose to any team of that group. And I think that going into Big East play, because I don't know if we're going to do another podcast before the Creighton game together, I think my take on Xavier in the Big East this year is that there are going to be a lot of games where Xavier's right in it, and maybe they win it, or maybe they take it right down to the wire and it's still an exciting game, but they don't win. And it's going to be against some of the top tier teams in the league. Could even beat UConn if UConn has an off night. And, we saw what happened last year during that Christmas break game. But there are also going to be some head scratching nights, maybe on the road in the middle of January or middle of February, where you're playing a game that you should probably win and it's a low energy environment. And Xavier just doesn't get the win. And those are the kinds of things that'll be frustrating, I'm sure, as the season goes on. But that's kind of my take on where Xavier is right now in the Big East.
Yeah, and I think even Richard said this earlier in the season during a press conference where he was like, this team isn't built to run away from anyone. Like, we're not going to blow teams out. We're going to be in a lot of close games this year. And I think, to your point about the way the conference sets up this year, I've mentioned this before. There isn't the DePaul team that's ranked 300th in the country. There isn't the Seton Hall from last year that's ranked outside the top 200. All of these teams, while yes, there is a pretty soft group in that middle of the pack towards the bottom of the conference that Xavier's in the mix with, they all can play to some extent. Like DePaul's 129th is the worst team in the conference. That's not a gimme game if you're on the road at DePaul necessarily. So, especially for this year's Xavier team. So I'm feeling like 6-4 or 5-5 out of that 10 game stretch. And then, which means if you can scratch out another 3-7 against the top teams in the conference, then you're talking about up to 17 wins, maybe in conference play. And that's a far cry from 11 where I was at to start the season. So you got to love.
You mean 17 wins overall on the season? Like they finished 17 and 14.
17 wins overall. Yeah, talking about, because you're at 8 going into conference play, assuming they beat Missouri State. And, like I said, if you get 6-4 against those bottom echelon teams, there's 10 teams that are similar to the Cincinnati and West Virginia teams that you've already beaten. If you can scratch out 6-4 against them and then go 3-7 in the 10 games against the top teams in the conference, the way it's set up right now, then you're talking about adding, 9 wins to the 8 you had in non-conference. You're sitting at 17 for the season. That's a far cry from 11 wins.
All right, let me throw this at you because I was thinking about this last night. This season to me, and not necessarily from the talent perspective, but just the way the season has played out, has been remarkably similar to 2 years ago. Not last year, but 2 years ago, the season that Xavier ended up with a losing record, went to the NIT. But you think about it, lost to a Big Ten team in the first 2 weeks of the season. They lost to Purdue. Xavier this year lost to Iowa. You go 1-1 in your MTE, lose the first game, win the second game. They beat St. Mary's. They beat West Virginia. You go into the shootout in a game that's pretty much 50-50. You win that game at home. Same deal both years. And then you go into conference play and you think, maybe you could do something here. And then it never really, the wheels kind of fell off in the Big East. The difference, though, to me, is that this year's Big East is way more attainable than that year's Big East was.
Yeah, no, I don't see. I view that differently. I view this team as now. I don't think they're as talented. There's no Ryan Conwell, Dalen Swain, and Zach Freemantle in this year's group. So you're more limited on what you think.
I'm talking.
I know.
2 years.
I know. Okay. I hear you. But what I'm saying is, I view this team as more closer to last year's group in terms of where they're at to this point. Because that team 2 years ago, Paul, they lost to Oakland and Delaware in the non-conference. This Xavier team didn't have those slip-ups. Santa Clara is a top 50 team in the country right now. Had they lost to UC, that's a worse loss than losing to Santa Clara. So while, they lost the bye game, it's not even close to losing to Oakland, ranked 131, or Delaware 169 2 years ago, like you're talking about. So I agree with you.
That's a good point. Hand up. I'll be a man. I totally forgot about those 2 bye game losses. Totally forgot about those 2.
Well, and this year, Paul, you look at it, and I wrote this actually in my recap after the Cincinnati game. They're actually in the exact same spot from a resume standpoint as they were last season, assuming they beat Missouri State. You're 8-3. You have no wins against quad 1 or quad 2 teams, which, obviously you'd like to have, but that's not how it worked out. And you're basically sitting in a spot where you'd have to have a miracle run through the Big East to get yourself an at-large bid. Last year's team had the talent to do that, and they finally put it together for that late stretch run at the very end of the year, and they snuck in as the last 4 team in. I think that would be very difficult for this year's team to pull off. I'm not at all saying that they're going to do that, but to think about, again, they don't have a Ryan Conwell, a Dalen Swain, and a Zach Freemantle in this lineup to get to basically the same exact point that last year's group was in. Feels like one of those groups overachieved and one of those groups underachieved.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Xavier right now today, we're recording this on December 10th. Xavier's sitting at 108 in the net today. Last year on December 10th, Xavier was sitting at 75. So metrics wise, about 30 some spots better than last year. But,
last year was better.
Last year was better than this year. You know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I was just kind of comparing, those couple of years and like, what could Xavier do here in the Big East? But, I still think the NCAA tournament is a far, far reaching goal for this team. But here's the thing though, Rick, here's the thing. The fact that I even said that, and I'm not saying this team is going to make the NCAA tournament. Right. Let me make that very clear. Maybe they do go on a miracle run. Maybe they make the tournament. Maybe they win the conference tournament. Who knows? But the fact that I'm even sitting here and I've gotten asked that question on Spaces of what could this team do, to me is a mind-boggling testament to what they've been able to turn around over the last 3 weeks after what we saw in the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, because to your point, that team two years ago that finished 16-18 overall, I mean, they went 9-11 in conference play, and that would be a really good run for this team, I think, if they were able to pull that off. But I think that team from 2 years ago, we're talking about Sasha Shiani and Gitas Namiksha, that group, right? That's the group we're talking about right now. I think that's more similar to this year's group in terms of talent level.
Yeah.
I think those teams are kind of comparable in terms of overall talent. Now, you don't have a Desmond Claude, you don't have a Quincy Oliveri out here, but guys like Jovan are really coming on. Tre Carroll's really coming on. Like, maybe they kind of blossom into being those go-to type of guys, and they don't have the upside of a Desmond Claude in terms of the pro projections, which obviously fell off for him. But you don't have that superior athlete out of the group, but they can play, I think.
Yeah, and think about next week. Think about Creighton and Georgetown. Both of those are I know the students will be gone, but think about how winnable that game is at home against Creighton on Wednesday night. You get a good crowd at the Cintas Center, Big East home opener on Wednesday night. Creighton's in town. That's a very gettable game. You go on the road to Georgetown. Maybe the environment's not great there on a weekend night. I think that's Saturday night at 8:00. You go to Georgetown. I'm just saying, man. You win those 2 games and you get 10 days off over Christmas. That's some buzz right there that you did not think you were going to have going into the year, where you're looking at the schedule and you're like, man, Georgetown added what in the portal, and Creighton's getting who back, and those are the first 2 games, and then you come out of break and you have UConn, and maybe you can get that DePaul game and that's your first Big East win. Now all of a sudden you're going, I think we should win that. If you're Xavier looking at this, it's like, you probably should win that Creighton game next Wednesday with how they're playing right now. Both teams.
Yeah. I mean, you feel like you should get off to a 2-0 start in conference play, right? With Creighton and Georgetown up there. So, I mean, we could probably talk all day about the turnaround, the job they've done, but that's the clear message coming out of this Crosstown Shootout is, one, kudos to the players. They stepped up. They made the plays. Tre Carroll was sensational. Philip Borovichin had some big moments. Others stepped up as well. And then the coaching staff, the job they've done to get this team to the point where we're having any of these conversations at all about the rest of this season and them making this interesting. That's the big takeaway from the beginning of the year to right now, coming off this Crosstown Shootout win.
And it also makes you excited seeing what they've done with this group to think, okay, what could they do in the future when they do have the top end talent that they're hoping they get, right? You retain some from this year, and then next year you add some big pieces, a couple big names out of the portal, and then you're really cooking. I mean, that's what makes this kind of a thing exciting, where there are no expectations going into the year, and now you've done something with it. We'll see what happens the rest of the year, but at least the non-conference has been something to hold on to.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Go listen to the Rebound Rundown. I really enjoyed your episode this week with David Wassler on NKU. So if you guys aren't already subscribed and listening to the Rebound Rundown daily, make sure you do that. Thanks, Paul. We'll talk soon.
Appreciate it.